The moment she stopped pretending to be fulfilled, Blend, Oregon. A story of transformation. Sarah Mitchell was 42 years old when she woke up on an ordinary Tuesday in October and realized she could no longer pretend. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, as always, and she reached out to turn it off with the same automatic movement as every other day. But something was different that morning. Maybe it was the gray light filtering through the curtains, typical of Portland in the fall. Maybe it was the distant sound of rain hitting the roof of her house in Hawthorne District. Or maybe it was simply the accumulated weight of years pretending everything was fine when, in reality, nothing was. Sarah sat up in bed and looked around the perfectly organized bedroom. The beige walls she had chosen 5 years ago because they were neutral and elegant. The matching curtains she had custom made. The oak dresser that cost 3 months of savings. Everything seemed to belong to someone else. She got up and went to the bathroom, avoiding her reflection in the mirror as she washed her face. But when she finally looked, she saw something she didn't expect. Her own empty eyes staring back. They weren't the tired eyes of someone who had worked too hard. They were the eyes of someone who had forgotten who she was. The perfect life. On paper, Sarah was a marketing manager at a sustainable tech company in downtown Portland. A job that looked perfect on LinkedIn. 6-figure salary, excellent benefits, modern office with free artisan coffee and ping-pong tables. People envied her. She drove to the office that morning in her Honda Accord hybrid, crossing the tree-lined streets of Portland. She passed over the Hawthorne Bridge across the Willamette River, seeing the brave cyclists facing the morning drizzle. She parked in the same spot as always, on the second floor of the parking garage. Upon entering the office, Sarah greeted everyone with her professional smile. "Good morning, Rachel," to the receptionist. "Hey, Kevin, how was your weekend?" To her colleague from the sales department. Automatic phrases, rehearsed smiles, a daily performance she had perfected over 14 years at the same company. But on that Tuesday, something was cracking inside. Sarah sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and looked at her calendar. Meeting at 9 about the new eco-friendly product campaign. Meeting at 11 with the creative team. Lunch with a potential client at 12:30. Meeting at 2 about performance metrics. Conference call at 4. The same endless routine that repeated week after week, month after month, year after year. She opened the presentation document she had been preparing for weeks. Digital engagement strategies for the 4th quarter. The words seemed meaningless. She read the first sentence 3 times and couldn't process the meaning. That's when her boss, Martin, appeared at her desk. "Sarah, I need that presentation by 3. The CEO wants to review it before tomorrow's meeting." She nodded mechanically. "Sure, Martin. No problem?" But her hands wouldn't move on the keyboard. She looked out the office window at the gray, wet city below. Suddenly, a question crossed her mind like lightning. What am I doing here? The marriage that never was. Sarah wasn't married. This bothered her mother in Seattle, who called every Sunday to ask if she had met anyone. At 42, Sarah had already passed the phase of apologizing for being single. She simply said, "I'm focused on my career, Mom." But the truth was more complicated. There had been relationships over the years. Tom, the yoga teacher who moved to Hawaii. David, the lawyer who married someone else 6 months after they broke up. Marcus, the musician who could never pay his own bills. Each relationship had ended for different reasons, but Sarah began to notice a pattern. She had never really opened up to any of them. "I'm fulfilled alone," she told her friends when they asked. "I don't need a man to be happy." Was it true? Was it a lie? Sarah didn't know anymore. She had repeated the phrase so many times that it had lost its meaning. That evening, after work, Sarah went to the Whole Foods on Division Street, as she did every Tuesday. She pushed the cart through the brightly lit aisles, picking up the same items as always. Organic salad, wild salmon, quinoa, ginger kombucha, the healthy and conscious life of a modern, independent woman. In the checkout line, she saw a woman with a small child. The girl must have been about 4 years old and was holding a coloring book, excitedly telling her mother about a drawing she had made at school. The mother smiled, tired but genuinely happy, asking questions about the drawing. Sarah felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't exactly envy. It was more like a longing for something she had never had. The night of truth. Back at her one-bedroom apartment in Hawthorne, Sarah prepared dinner. Grilled salmon, steamed asparagus, quinoa. She ate alone at the kitchen table, looking at her phone, scrolling through social media, without really seeing anything. The photos scrolled by. Former college classmates on vacation in Italy. Ex-boyfriends now married with children. Friends celebrating promotions, birthdays, weddings. Everyone seemed to be living lives full of meaning and purpose. And there was Sarah, eating salmon alone on a rainy Tuesday in Portland. She put the phone aside and just sat there, in the silence of her apartment. The only sound was the rain hitting the window and the distant hum of the heater. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to be alone with her thoughts, without distractions. And it was terrifying. Because when she really looked at her life, without the filters and justifications, without the ready-made phrases she used to convince herself that everything was okay, what she saw was a carefully constructed facade. She didn't love her job. She never had. She was just good at it, and the salary was great, so she had stayed. 14 years doing something that didn't make her happy because she was afraid to try something else. She wasn't totally fulfilled single. She was lonely, and not the peaceful loneliness of someone who chooses to be alone, but the painful loneliness of someone who had been so afraid to open up that she pushed everyone away. She had no real hobbies, no passions. When people asked what she did for fun, Sarah said, yoga, reading, hiking. But when was the last time she had actually gone hiking because she wanted to, not because she thought she should exercise? When was the last time she had read a book that wasn't about productivity or self-help? The tears began to fall, slowly at first. Then, in uncontrollable sobs, Sarah cried at the kitchen table, surrounded by the remains of her healthy and lonely dinner, crying for all the years she had wasted pretending. The resignation. The next morning, Sarah woke up with swollen eyes, but with a strange clarity. She knew what she needed to do. She dressed carefully, choosing her best navy blue blazer. She arrived at the office at 8, an hour earlier than normal. She went straight to Martin's office. "I need to talk to you," she said. Martin was drinking his morning coffee, looking at emails on his phone. "Sure, Sarah. Is the presentation ready?" "It's not about the presentation. I'm resigning." The silence was deafening. Martin stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. What? "I'm resigning. 2 weeks' notice." Martin recovered from the initial shock and went into negotiation mode. "Sarah, you've been here for 14 years. You're one of our best managers. If it's about salary, we can talk. It's not about money." "Then what is it? Another job offer?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't have another offer. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I just know I can't keep pretending this makes me happy." Saying those words out loud was both liberating and terrifying. She was throwing away security, a comfortable salary, benefits. She was jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was a safety net below. But for the first time in years, Sarah was being honest. The reactions. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Sarah, the stable and reliable manager, was leaving without having another job lined up. People reacted in different ways. Some thought she was having a crisis. 42, single, resigning. She's going through something, they whispered at the water cooler. Others were inspired. Rachel, the 25-year-old receptionist, came to talk to Sarah. I admire you for doing this. How many people stay stuck in jobs they hate because they're afraid to change? And there were those who were genuinely concerned. Kevin, her colleague of 10 years, took her out for coffee. Are you sure about this, Sarah? It's a risky move. I'm sure I can't continue living this way, she replied. The rest, I'll figure out. The 2 weeks' notice were surreal. Sarah finished her projects, transferred her responsibilities to others, emptied her desk. It was strange to dismantle 14 years of life into cardboard boxes. But it was also liberating. The void and the discovery. On the first day after leaving her job, Sarah woke up without an alarm for the first time in years. It was 9 in the morning when she opened her eyes. There were no meetings to attend, emails to answer, deadlines to meet. It was terrifying. She made coffee and sat on the couch, looking out the window. Portland's rain continued, constant and comforting. She had no idea what to do with herself. The first days were difficult. Sarah had built her entire identity around work. When people asked, "What do you do?" she answered, "I'm a marketing manager." Now, what was she? She began to walk around the city with no specific destination. Portland was a city she had lived in for 15 years but had never really explored. She was always too busy, always rushing from one place to another. Now she had time. She discovered a small independent bookstore on Burnside Street that sold used books and served chai lattes. She spent an entire afternoon there, browsing through poetry books, something she hadn't done since college. She found a farmer's market on Saturdays at Portland State University that she had never visited. Despite passing by it every week for years, she bought fresh flowers from an elderly lady who grew dahlias in her garden in Clackamas. She started attending a pottery studio on Southeast Division, not because she was trying to find a new productive hobby, but because the idea of working with clay seemed interesting. Her first pieces were horrible, poorly made and crooked, and she loved every minute. The difficult conversations. 3 weeks after leaving her job, Sarah finally called her mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something." The silence on the other end of the line when Sarah explained that she had resigned was louder than any scream. Then came the predictable questions. Why? Do you have money saved? What are you going to do now? Did you find a boyfriend? No, Mom, I didn't find a boyfriend. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I just know I needed to stop living a life that wasn't mine. There was a long pause. Then her mother said something unexpected. I understand. You understand. I spent 30 years married to your father, working at a job I hated, because it was what was expected of me. When you and your brother left home, I looked around and realized I had built an entire life around what others wanted. I don't want that for you, dear. It was the most honest conversation Sarah had had with her mother in years. Therapy. Sarah started therapy. Something she had avoided for years, convinced she could solve her own problems. Her therapist, Dr. Chen, had a cozy office in Northwest Portland, with plants everywhere and a window overlooking the trees. You said you spent years pretending to be fulfilled, Dr. Chen said in one of their sessions. What do you think you were trying to prove? Sarah thought for a long moment. That I had control, that I had made the right choices, that I hadn't wasted my life. And now I think I spent so much time trying to prove I was okay that I forgot to actually live. It was a painful but necessary revelation. In the following sessions, Sarah began to unearth layers of herself that she had buried years ago. The girl who wanted to be a writer but was discouraged because it doesn't pay. The young woman who was afraid to commit in relationships because she saw her parents fight for 20 years before divorcing. The adult who built walls so high around herself that no one could get in. "What do you want, Sarah?" asked Dr. Chen. "Not what you think you should want. What do you really want?" No one had asked Sarah that question in a long time. Maybe never. The reunion. In November, Sarah was at a cafe in Alberta Arts District when she saw a familiar face. Emma, her best friend from college with whom she had lost touch 8 years ago. "Sarah? Oh my God, Sarah Mitchell!" They hugged, awkward at first, then with genuine joy. "What are you doing in Portland?" asked Sarah. "I've lived here for 3 years. I work as a freelance photographer. And you?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled. "Recently unemployed. I left my job a month ago without having any idea what to do next." To her surprise, Emma laughed. "That's so brave. I did the same thing 5 years ago. Best decision I ever made." They spent the afternoon talking, catching up. Emma talked about leaving her corporate job in Seattle to pursue photography, about the difficult first years, sleeping on friends' couches, eating ramen, but also about the joy of waking up every day, doing something she loved. "I'm not going to lie and say it's easy," Emma said. "There are months when I can barely pay rent, but I'm happy, Sarah. Genuinely happy. I'm not pretending anymore." Those words resonated deeply. The writing. That night, Sarah opened her laptop and started writing. Not for work, not for productivity, but just for herself. She wrote about the last 15 years of her life, about the relationships she had sabotaged out of fear, about the job she had kept because it was safe, about all the times she had said, "I'm fine," when she wasn't. Words flowed from her like a torrent, years of pent-up emotions finally finding an outlet. She wrote until 3 in the morning, until her hands hurt and her eyes were dry. When she finally stopped, she had 30 pages of raw, honest, chaotic text. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt something real. Not exactly happiness, but authenticity. She was allowing herself to feel without filters, without performances. The plan, or lack thereof. December arrived, bringing Portland's characteristic cold. Sarah had enough savings for another 6 months, maybe a year if she was careful. She knew she would eventually need to figure out how to make money again, but for now she was focused on something more important. Discovering who she really was. She began volunteering at a homeless shelter in Old Town, not because it looked good on her resume, but because she wanted to do something that mattered. She continued her pottery classes and even sold some pieces at a local craft market. Not to make money, but because it brought joy to people. She started attending poetry readings at small cafes, something she would have considered a waste of time before. And she kept writing. Every night, she wrote, without judgment, without expectations, just honest words on a page. The unexpected meeting. On a December afternoon, Sarah was at the shelter when she met James. He was also a volunteer, a 45-year-old history teacher who dedicated his weekends to helping others. They started talking while serving dinner. James had a dry sense of humor that made Sarah genuinely laugh for the first time in weeks. "So, what brought you here?" he asked. Sarah thought about giving her standard answer, something superficial and socially acceptable. But then she decided to be honest. "I was living a life that wasn't mine and realized I was unhappy. I'm trying to figure out how to really live." James nodded, as if he completely understood. "I had a similar crisis 5 years ago. I was married, working 60 hours a week, completely miserable. The divorce was the hardest thing I ever did, but also the most liberating. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't magical. It was just two people being honest with each other about their imperfections and struggles. And that was refreshing. The slow transformation. Sarah didn't have an instant transformation. There was no magical moment where everything clicked and she found her purpose. Instead, there were small, daily changes, waking up and asking herself what she really wanted to do that day, not what she thought she should do. Saying no to things that didn't serve her. Saying yes to things that scared her but intrigued her. She started going out with James regularly. Not officially dating, just two people who enjoyed each other's company. No pressure, no expectations. It was different from any relationship she had had before. Emma became a close friend again. They met every week, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes for long walks through Forest Park. Emma was documenting her own journey through photography and asked to photograph Sarah. The photos were revealing. Sarah saw herself through Emma's eyes, not the polished and controlled executive she had tried to be, but a real woman, with wrinkles around her eyes, gray hair she had stopped dyeing, vulnerable and authentic. January, a new year, a new Sarah. When January came, Sarah had completed 3 months since she had left her job. She was at Powell's Books, Portland's famous bookstore that occupied an entire block, when she saw an ad on the community bulletin board. A small independent publisher was looking for a freelance editor. Sarah looked at the ad for a long time. It wasn't marketing management. It wouldn't pay as much as her previous job. But it was working with words, with stories, with creativity. She took a photo of the ad and sent her resume that same night, including some of her own writing. The response came 3 days later. They wanted an interview. Sarah sat down with the owner of the publisher, a 60-year-old woman named Margaret, at a cozy cafe. Margaret had founded the publisher 20 years ago, publishing voices of local and overlooked writers. "Why do you want this job?" asked Margaret. Sarah could have given a professional answer, talking about her skills and experience. Instead, she was honest. "I spent 14 years in a job that made me unhappy because I was afraid to try something else. I want to work with something that matters to me. Words matter, stories matter, and I want to be part of bringing these stories to the world." Margaret smiled. "You're hired." What changed? As Sarah walked home that afternoon, through the familiar streets of Portland, she thought about how her life had changed in just 3 months. She wasn't making as much money. Her apartment was the same. She was still navigating the challenges of her relationships and discovering who she was. But something fundamental had changed. She had stopped pretending. She stopped pretending she was happy when she wasn't. She stopped pretending she wanted things she really didn't want. She stopped living her life according to a script someone else had written. For the first time in years, when someone asked, "How are you?" Sarah could answer honestly. Sometimes it was, "I'm struggling." Sometimes it was, "I'm confused." Sometimes it was, "I'm really happy today," and it was okay. All of those answers were valid. The lesson, Sarah learned that fulfillment is not a goal to be achieved, but an ongoing process of alignment between who you are and how you live. It's not about having the perfect career, the perfect relationship, the perfect life. It's about being honest with yourself about what you really want and having the courage to pursue it, even when it's scary. She learned that 42 years old wasn't too late to start over. It wasn't too late to change direction, to admit you were wrong, to try something new. She learned that vulnerability is not weakness. Admitting you're struggling, that you don't have all the answers, that you're afraid, that requires more courage than pretending everything is fine. And she learned that the journey of discovering who you really are never ends. It's a constant process of peeling back layers, of questioning, of growing. Epilogue. 6 months later, Sarah was in her small office at the publisher, working on a manuscript by a debut author. It was a story about a woman who had lost everything but found herself in the process. Sarah smiled. She knew that story intimately. Her phone rang. It was James asking if she wanted to have dinner that night. She replied yes, suggesting a new Thai restaurant Emma had recommended. Then she checked her messages. Her mother had sent a photo of her garden in Seattle, along with a message. "Thought of you today. I'm proud of you for following your heart." Tears stung Sarah's eyes, but she was smiling. She looked out her office window at the streets of Portland below. The rain was falling, but rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds, creating ephemeral rainbows over the city. Sarah returned to the manuscript, her hands hovering over the keyboard. She had work to do, not because she had to do it, but because she wanted to do it. And that difference was everything. At 42 years old, Sarah Mitchell had finally stopped pretending to be fulfilled. And by doing so, she had begun the true journey toward genuine fulfillment. A journey that had no end, but was worth every step. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't have everything figured out. She still struggled, still had doubts, still had difficult days, but she was living honestly. She was being authentic. She was being herself, and for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough.